Well, in the early 1980s, horror fiction had become tremendously popular as a marketing category through Stephen King and Peter Straub primarily, and the popularity of their books. That rode, of course, on the coattails of Ira Levin and William Peter Blatty and Tom Tryon. But horror was perceived generally as a genre, and publishers perceived it that way. In other words, they considered Stephen King as a kind of breakthrough artist, something of a happy accident in terms of popularity and in terms of that short-term lasting popularity. But the publishers generally saw this as a kind of one book a month genre notion. And that's when Clive Barker came along. In 1983, my wife and I were visiting England. I was conducting interviews for two books I was writing then, my book on Stephen King, Art of Darkness, and a book called Faces of Fear, which was a collection of interviews with writers of horror fiction. We were staying with Ramsey Campbell and his wife, and he got up, left for a few minutes, came back with this big stack of galleys. They were photocopy galleys. And he handed them to me and he said, this is the finest horror writer of this decade. And I started reading them, and he was absolutely right. And that was the Books of Blood. His language was terrific. His style was terrific, but it was also very unique. He had a voice that was his and his alone. Now that's a rarity when you talk about things like genre fiction, where writers are so often being encouraged or driven to, or the market is dictating that they write like other books. Clive was very much painterly as a writer. And you could tell that this was the voice both of someone who was very enthusiastic about what they did, but also had that uniqueness that could push the things he was doing, which at the time were very transgressive, into the mainstream and beyond. Now, less than 3 weeks after I read the Books of Blood in galley form, I met Clive in London. He was just an extremely charming guy. And he was also someone who was so enthusiastic about what he was doing that it was quite refreshing. You understand, I was seeing someone who was just beginning the arc of their career into an immense kind of popularity. And typically, the people who have that happen to them, they don't often exude that kind of self-confidence. It's more often than not a kind of shot in the dark situation, a 1,000,000-to-1 opportunity that just happens to happen. And then the question is, how do they deal with that sudden spotlight? Clive, you felt that he knew where he was going, and he knew where he wanted to go, and he was filled with ambition and filled with self-confidence, which really marked him as someone who was genuinely impressive as a person, as well as a creative talent. The Forbidden appeared in volume 5 of the Books of Blood, which was published in the United States as The Inhuman Condition. The title, The Forbidden, refers to the forbidden fruit. It refers to the Faustian Pact, Pandora's box. It's that thing that we're led to believe we desire, or at least we desire to see or to know. And part of the reason we desire it is that it's forbidden to us. And that only increases the desire to see it, or to know it, or to experience it. I find The Forbidden to be the archetypal Clive Barker horror story for the simple reason that it is a horror story about horror stories, about the allure of horror stories, about why it is we want to read them, why we want to read Clive Barker. Why does it hold this power over us? It's something about the human existence, and something about the existential dilemma, something about wanting to know the unknown and wanting to understand what death is all about. I think Candyman captures the essence of The Forbidden in many ways. The differences have to do primarily with locale. There's some differences in character names, and I think that's a result of two artists with two visions wanting to do things their way. But in The Forbidden itself, it's set in a slum, in essence, in Liverpool, Clive's hometown. And it's the story of an academic woman researcher who becomes fascinated with the subject matter of graffiti. And that fascination, which is told from a very academic perspective, meaning she has a belief that she can, through logic, understand chaos, what this graffiti really means. And through that experience of trying to learn more about it, she learns of stories that can be discounted as urban legends, but in fact they're not. She learns of a creature who can be discounted as an urban legend called the Candyman, but he cannot. She learns that her interest in pursuing this question of why we read such things leads her to a strong understanding and experiencing of her own mortality. The Candyman, in a way, is a forgotten god who is the stuff of myth, the stuff of legend, and now he's fading away. And she's the one who somehow helps keep him alive because of her fascination with his acts, her fascination with the impact on this particular community, her fascination with why this community lives in the way that it lives and why these terrible things are happening. And she learns through this bargain with the dark that her eyes have been cloaked for a long time, and then her eyes are open to the reality that this is a symbol, in essence, of her own mortality, of her oncoming death. Bernard Rose came to write and direct Candyman through a fortuitous set of circumstances. He was filming Chicago Joe and the Showgirl at Pinewood Studios at the same time that Clive was making Nightbreed there. And they happened to meet over lunch and became acquainted. Bernard Rose had not read any of Clive Barker before that time, and as he told me, at least, at the time I was writing my book on Clive, he hadn't seen Hellraiser to this day. He happened across a copy of the Books of Blood several months later, and he read the books because he had met Clive and was interested in what he had done as a writer. And he came across this story. He liked several of the stories. He thought several of them could make for great films, but The Forbidden particularly interested him, and that's the one he optioned to make Candyman. Clive took a very hands-off approach to Candyman. He served as executive producer and, of course, licensed the rights to create the film, but I think he had great confidence in Bernard Rose based on what Bernard had done and based upon his vision for the story. So this is very much a Bernard Rose film, and it's very much a Bernard Rose adaptation of a Clive Barker story. And you can see that in certain aspects of the story, not simply in its different geographic background. The most significant change Candyman made to The Forbidden was a change of geographic locale. Bernard Rose took a story that was set in the slums of Liverpool and brought it to the United States. And his intent there was a very good one, and it was a very canny one, because he wanted also to deal with the issue of race. He saw the story as involving the issue of class, which is crucial to understanding a lot of English society and a lot of the issues that Clive was getting at in the story of The Forbidden. He wanted to take that and amplify it even more by bringing it to the United States. So he went to Chicago, and he literally asked officials there to take him to the worst parts of town, and that led him to Cabrini Green, which is where the film is set, which at the time was considered the worst ghetto area of Chicago. There are other changes, of course, from The Forbidden that take place in Candyman, from the changing of the name of the lead character to the way in which there's a backstory developed for Candyman, to the interactions with different and somewhat new characters in the film that aren't in the story. And I attribute those reasons primarily to authorship, meaning this was Bernard Rose's film. He also had to create a film that, by definition, going over 90 minutes, was going to cover more than Clive's short story did. If you were to take the short story and treat it purely, you probably couldn't get a feature film out of it. You had to have certain kinds of scenes in it that where the audience needs to see or be told or understand things about the characters that when you're writing short fiction, you don't need to provide. So there's that whole question of details and the whole question of visuals. So I think Bernard Rose also wanted this very much to be a Bernard Rose film. And he should have that pride of authorship because he is an independent artist in his own right. I suppose I would describe a Bernard Rose film with envy. He has a tremendous diversity in his work. I mean, ranging from Chicago Joe to Candyman to Anna Karenina to Ivan's Ecstasy, which I think is a tremendously overlooked film. He's a remarkable talent, and he's also a talent who's very much like Clive in the extent that he's an independent artist. He does what he wants to do, and he does it well. He bucks the system quite often, and that's led to, I think, some difficulties for him from a commercial standpoint, but he's made that decision for himself, and I really respect the work he's done. Candyman in the short story is described very much as a cross between something of a carnival showman and a seducer. He's dressed in motley. He's dressed as a bit of a caricature. He seems to have stepped out of a nearly surreal painting of the type that Helen sees in the story. Whereas the Candyman, as he appears in the film, is a much more mythic sort of seducer. I thought that Tony Todd was an incredible choice to play that role, that he has this certain elegance to him and yet this brooding side that makes him a kind of royalty of horror. And his character is very much, at least until the end game of the film, his character is very much above it all. It's befitting of being the myth and legend that the Candyman is in Clive's story. Helen in the short story is much more of an introverted pursuer of these truths that she's after. We know that she's approaching this as an academician. She becomes something of a female Gothic detective. And there's this feminist element to that. She's under the thumb of the older academics. She has a husband who's a lech and who disregards her. And she's drawn to this symbol of fantasy, of a kind of choice that she's not willing to make, but that in the end, and we learn this particularly in Candyman, she's drawn to like a moth to the flame. In the aftermath of Candyman's success, following the great tradition that occurs when any horror film is successful, there was a desire by the studio, at least, to produce a sequel. They wanted more of the Candyman. They wanted to have what they thought would be a repetitive horror icon like Freddy Krueger or Jason, even though it should have been apparent on the face of the film that that wasn't the intent. And in fact, the way the film ends kind of rules out that intent. It suggests that if there's going to be a sequel, that it should be Helen who's comes back as the Candyman. Well, that wasn't to happen, and sequels were to follow, using Tony Todd again as the Candyman. I believe the adaptation of Candyman was very, very successful as film, as well as an adaptation of a short story. Believe me, I know enough writers who've had enough of their pieces adapted for film who will tell you that it's very rare that anyone is happy with the adaptations. And as you know, as a viewer, it's very rare that viewers who are also readers are happy with film adaptations of work that they love. In this instance, Rose took a property. He went at it with intelligence. He went at it with care. He had a vision, and he fulfilled that vision. I don't know that he was entirely as happy with Candyman as a lot of the audience members were, because he also felt that by the end of the film, once more and more of the character came out and more of the violence came out, that it was in the realm of explication rather than the realm of imagery, rather than trying to create the kind of compelling images that would haunt viewers, that he was forced, as many film directors are, to become much more literal. As an adaptation, if you put the two works next to each other, you can say it's not a faithful adaptation if we talk literally, if we talk about things like character names, if we talk about the ethnicity of characters. Of course it's not, but it is very, very true to Clive's intent with the short story, and it's very, very true to the emotional and psychological impact of the story.